Overall, the Biden administration has canceled more than $17 billion in debt for 725,000 borrowers, from fixing public service loan forgiveness programs to addressing the borrower's defense backlog. It's good to see that President Biden is helping out the American people with stimulus checks. If you think he's doing a good job on this, tell me down in the comments. We're back, everybody, and we have some more stimulus information. Social Security news. SSI SSDI stimulus checks. It's official that a fourth stimulus check is going out. Lawmakers have even suggested a one-time tax credit will provide up to $2,000 in additional financial aid to help people during this time. The administration has confirmed that they will take action to address rising inflation. So everybody, continue watching this video because you definitely don't want to miss out on this. As inflation continues to rock the country, households are losing purchasing power. Prices are up on average 8.5% over last year, with increasing fuel costs driving the surge. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that the gasoline index rose 18.3% in March and accounted for over half of all the items' monthly increase. As fuel prices increase, so do transportation costs. For many firms, companies pass along these increased costs to the consumer by charging higher prices. What is clear is that the current bout of inflation seen in the market is not affecting all products in the same way. The Consumer Price Index decreased by 0.4% in March when energy and food commodities were removed from the average. In response to increasing inflation, the Federal Reserve has announced that it will raise interest rates. What some economists are saying is that while prices are rising at historic levels, this is unlike other periods of high inflation seen in the country. The root cause, increased fuel prices and a lower supply of consumer goods, has led to a classic recipe for inflation. Economists believe that it could be a short-sighted term for this Federal Reserve to begin engaging in interest rate hikes, as it could leave those at the bottom of the income scale to suffer the most. When interest rates increase, money begins to move more slowly throughout the economy. This can make it more difficult for firms, individuals to gain access to credit, and in many cases, there is an associated rise in unemployment. Economists are warning that interest rate increase could stunt the economic recovery, which has empowered workers for the first time in decades, giving them greater leverage when negotiating salaries and benefits. Of a one-time inflation adjustment tax cut for lower and mid-income households, a more significant tax return could support families in the short term to counter the impact of increased prices. While prices are up more than 8%, wages have only increased 4.5% in the last year. Folks, President Biden also took his second trip to New Hampshire in less than 6 months to talk about the infrastructure law, using projects talking about the place in the harbors. He actually said it's estimated that driving on those roads, roughly 700 miles, that needs to be repaired in New Hampshire. He also touched on replacing lead pipes in homes and schools, addressing the threats to drinking water, and investing in high-speed internet. The president made it clear that he is moving forward with his Build Back Better package. He said the last fella at the job kept talking about infrastructure week for years. We have an infrastructure decade beyond gas prices, and I call on Congress to move immediately on lowering families' utility bills, prescription bills, and more. Will President Biden keep his word, everybody? And how about the American people with stimulus checks and Social Security benefits? Well, tell me your thoughts on this. For the next 75 years by raising payroll taxes. Another proposal, which is the Social Security Expansion Act from Bernie Sanders, also aims to increase benefits for low earners while raising taxes for those with higher wages. In a statement, Larson said the Biden administration and members of the Senate and House are looking to come to a consensus by holding roundtables and evaluating different proposals. Larson said there are a lot of similarities between the Social Security 2100 Act and President Biden's proposal. We will be reintroducing a modified Social Security 2100 Act based on what comes out these decisions. Meanwhile, on the Republican side, Mitt Romney has touted the Trust Act, which will let lawmakers form bipartisan committees to address programs like Social Security that face a shortfall in funding and fast-track changes to improve them. But traditional Senate negotiations would need bipartisan support, and that means Democrats would have to support the bill in order to be passed. There are also many groups like Social Security Works and the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare that are focused on preventing benefit cuts that would negatively impact the millions of people. Folks, that's all of breaking news about the fourth stimulus payments that I want you to know. So be sure to continue watching more stimulus check updates.
Go ahead.
Question on inflation, since this is the first time we've had a briefing since those numbers came out. The president has said the administration is going to continue to be all hands on deck to try and bring prices back down. Can you give us a sense of what that really looks like? Because you've pointed many times to parts of the Build Back Better agenda. That remains stalled. In fact, one of Senator Manchin's big objections to the bill was the high rate of inflation. So if the Build Back Better plan sort of remains at this impasse, what's Plan B to try and bring down some of these costs?
Well, there's a couple steps that the president is very focused on as it relates to addressing inflation. One, I would note that economists in the Federal Reserve still predict that inflation will come down, will moderate over the course of the year. And the president has also said that he supports the steps that the Federal Reserve, an independent body, has announced about recalibrating over the course of the coming months. And he's obviously nominated a number of individuals to fill the board, which is an essential part of addressing this. But I would also note beyond that, how the president really looks at this is how you're addressing core costs for the American people. So you referenced the Build Back Better plan. First, we believe there's a path forward, and the president's going to continue to fight for it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone to Virginia earlier this week and talked about negotiating the price of prescription drugs. So his view is that in order to address costs that have been affecting inflation, but also infecting families for many decades, the cost of prescription drugs, the cost of childcare, we need to move that forward. But it's not just that. We also need to address supply chains in the short term at the ports, rebuild our manufacturing infrastructure, make sure that we are implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law and continuing to press for the competitiveness legislation that will help ensure we have funding for chips for manufacturing of cars here in the United States. And you've also heard him talk a fair amount about promoting competition, and that addresses
just as we close out this hearing, we don't do this, but Ms. Clayton, is there a question that we did not ask? Is there a question that should be asked? Is there something that you want to know?
Thank you. My question is, why is it that it's only once a year that the buildings or the apartments are inspected? Me, personally, I think they should be inspected at least 3 times a year.
Anybody?
It's a great question to ask, and I think that we would all say that I think we are in lots of buildings multiple times. I think that in the case of this building, certainly for our inspections, we didn't have any heat complaints. And so there's also sort of a disconnect, I think, on some level between the lived experience of the people in the building and what is showing up on the inspection reports. And I think that's a complicated issue to tackle about the efficacy or the what's required in the inspections. If we did them more, would we get more? If we still sort of got the same outcome, we're not in the right place. So I think it's a great question to ask. I don't necessarily have an answer about doing it more as much as to sort of acknowledge that I think that